Well, we've all been watching the latest conflict between Israel and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip. The fighting has killed more than 2,000 people, most of them Palestinian civilians.
Well, in more than 4 weeks of fighting, homes and businesses have been destroyed on both sides of the border, with Hamas firing rockets into Israel and Israel pounding Gaza with airstrikes.
VOA's Scott Bobb has been in the midst of the action for the better part of a month, making several trips into some of Gaza's worst-hit neighborhoods. I talked with him via Skype. Describe for us the level of devastation that you saw.
Well, in some areas it was relatively light, and then in others it was almost total. Some of these areas along the border with Israel, the boundary, were just completely razed, entire neighborhoods, and also in the north. In others it was an isolated building, a mosque, an office building, or a company. And then there were some areas like rockets that seemed to sort of hit randomly on apartment buildings, often the top floors, or sometimes it seemed they were targeted, sometimes not. But every Gazan that I spoke to knew people who had been killed, who had been wounded, distant family members or close family members. And so really you could say that the entire territory of 1.8 million people has been traumatized by this ordeal.
Late morning in Beit Lahia, north of Gaza City. Although it is a workday, this is a ghost town. Most residents fled during the Israeli military incursion here. The purpose was to eliminate tunnels and rocket sites of the Hamas group that controls Gaza. Residents were warned ahead of time to leave the area for their safety, but some chose to stay.
Scott, I want to talk about the hospital you went to. How have the medical resources during this time been holding up?
Well, they are strained beyond belief. There are not enough beds. There's not enough medicine. There's not enough staff, according to the doctors I spoke to. Staff members and volunteers are working 2 8-hour shifts every 24 hours, which means they work 8 hours and they're off for 4 hours. And they've been doing that since the conflict began a month ago. So this strain is going to continue because even though perhaps there are no new wounded arriving, there are 9,000 wounded that continue to need care. They're trying to send some of them to other countries, Egypt, Jordan, even Israel in its field hospital.
What are going to be the lingering psychological effects of this?
Long term, of course, we think of the children first, and I've done reports earlier on this, the degree of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder they experience, bedwetting, regressive behavior, lower grades in school, disinterest in school, sometimes withdrawal. All of these are what children often show, and there are very few facilities in Gaza to deal with that. There are a few, but they're not very many, and also culture itself is not one that encourages people with problems to seek out help. Also adults, women particularly, are very reluctant to come forward, and so they will often exhibit physiological problems, headaches, or pains requiring medicine. And psychologists I spoke to say that often this is what they see among women. They'll come with a physiological malady asking for medicine. And so you have a problem with drugs, drug abuse, drug use, and so forth. Among the men, again, similar thing, anger, denial, fear, withdrawal.
Looking ahead, what's next for Gaza?
Well, I was talking to some analysts and people who have been through this before, and they say, you know, you can't even start to talk about reconstruction because we've got 400 to 500,000 people without homes. They're living in schools that are supposed to reopen in 3 weeks. We've got to, first of all, find places for them to stay and find a regular way to keep them supplied with food, medicine, and their needs. And not to forget that sanitation, water supply, and sewage have been severely damaged during the war. And so you have the threat of disease outbreaks, communicable diseases. And all of this has to be dealt with really before you can start to rebuild. So we're looking at a tremendous humanitarian need here. And I think it's only beginning to dawn on the general public and a lot of people just how extensive it's going to be.
All right, and of course we have to thank Scott for going into Gaza, reporting for us there on the ground.